Did you know the ancient Babylonians made New Year's resolutions? Seriously, 4,000 years ago, they'd make pledges to their gods, like promising to repay debts, give back the hedge clippers, be better people, sacrifice more kids to Marduk, the usual stuff. And to make sure the king took it seriously, a priest would slap him across the face during the ceremony, and if they didn't live up to those resolutions, well, gods would punish them with fire, with locusts, with plagues. And the ancient Babylonians, I think we can all agree, were idiots. Because we all know resolutions don't work, particularly the New Year's kinds. And as for making those pledges to vengeful gods, well, that's only going to end badly. And yet, at least those resolutions had consequences. At least they had to answer to Ishtar, the goddess of war and love and generally not messing around. Whereas when we make a resolution, we answer to our notes app, which as far as I'm aware has never once smited anybody. So here's my modest proposal. Let's bring back Ishtar, good old vengeful Ishtar. And if we skip leg day this year, may she rain down fire and pestilence and, Rob Schneider films upon us? Okay, probably not. But maybe there's something here worth thinking about, because we're still doing this ritual 4,000 years later, still making promises to ourselves every single January, and still mostly failing. In fact, a recent study found that only 8% of us, 8% successfully complete our New Year's resolutions each year. Pitiful. Really, Ishtar, put us out of our misery. But what I want to argue in this video is that the problem isn't your willpower. It's not your goal-setting framework. It's not that you didn't make it specific enough or measurable enough. The problem is that we skip the hard questions. Why do we want to become this different person? What are we trying to escape? What do we actually value? Not what Instagram or the internet tells us to value, not what the self-improvement industry is selling to us, but what do we genuinely care about when nobody's watching? And here's the other question no resolution video really wants to ask. What if it's not us who needs to change? What if the problem is the world we're living in, the culture, the systems, the context that makes certain ways of living so hard? Because I'm going to suggest that maybe we should still make resolutions, but that maybe the best ones aren't about what we're going to do for ourselves. Maybe they're about what we can do for others. And there's quite a few philosophers out there who tend to agree. So let's find out. Now, quick disclaimer, this is not a productivity video. I'm not going to tell you to wake up at 5 a.m. and take cold showers and journal with military precision. There are plenty of those videos out there. They're very popular. Good luck to them. What we're doing here is philosophy, which means that we're going to think about selfhood and values and guilt and the culture that keeps selling us a new identity every January. And we'll steal a little bit of psychology too, because you can't avoid it with this topic. But then we're going to, improve it a bit and use it to ask some of the harder, more philosophical questions. So here's where we're going. Firstly, a quick history, because this ritual is actually ancient, and knowing that actually sort of helps liberate ourselves from it. Then we'll look at the fresh start story and why it's so seductive, plus why it might be exactly the wrong kind of approach. Thirdly, we'll look at the deeper problem, the problem that why try harder is a trap, and what we're actually struggling with when the resolutions fail. And finally, we'll look at a different way to think about this. One that's less about fixing yourself and more about, well, we'll get there. But first, let's start with the history. Now, as I mentioned, the Babylonians kicked this off at around 2000 BCE. And the Akitu festival marked the start of the agricultural year, spring, new crops, new king or a renewed king. And the whole community made vows to the gods. Now, these weren't private self-improvement projects, but ones that were kind of public and communal and spiritually binding. And that's really interesting to me because it's very different to the kind of resolutions that we make today. But we'll get back to that in a minute, because then the Romans got involved. They moved the new year to January and dedicated it to Janus, the two-faced god who looks backward and forward at the same time, which is actually kind of a perfect symbol for what we do every New Year's Eve. We're reviewing the past and projecting into the future, usually while mildly drunk. And the Romans also made sacrifices to Janus and promised to behave better, still communal, still religious, although typically for the Romans a little legalistic and rule lawyering too. And importantly, it still had consequences if you broke that oath. Now, the early Christians kept this tradition but Christianized it, as they tended to do. The 1st of January became a time for reflecting on your sins and resolving to do better. By 1740, John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, had created watch night services where congregants would stay up until midnight on New Year's Eve and pray and sing hymns and renew their covenant with God, their accountability to the divine, in other words. Then something really interesting happens in the 17th and 18th centuries, because this is where we start seeing personal resolutions in diaries. Anne Halkett, a Scottish writer, has a page titled Resolutions in her 1671 diary. And these were pledges drawn from scripture and written out on January 2nd. Jonathan Edwards, the Puritan theologian, wrote 70 resolutions for himself. Suddenly we see the practice becoming more private and more introspective. And by 1813, a Boston newspaper is already being cynical about it. It observed that people, quote, sin all the month of December with a serious determination of the beginning of the new year with new resolutions and new behaviour. So 200 years ago, people already noticed the pattern. Overindulge at New Year's end, feel guilty and promise to be better, fail and repeat. Here's the key shift though. Over time, I think these resolutions went from being communal and spiritual to personal and secular. We stopped pledging to gods or to communities. We stopped making promises about how we treat others. Instead, we started making private vows about self-improvement. Get thinner, get richer, get more productive. We dropped the gods and the community, but we kept the guilt and we added the notes out. And that guilt part, I think, matters more than we usually acknowledge. Because think about when most resolutions get made. It's not a neutral moment. It's usually the end of, let's say, a period of excess. We've just spent weeks eating too much, drinking too much, spending too much, and doing too little of whatever we think we should be doing. The holidays are a culturally sanctioned break from our usual discipline. Then the 1st of January arrives and we feel bad, sluggish, guilty, like we've let something slide, certainly the belt a few notches at least. So we make resolutions. But the emotional fuel isn't excitement or curiosity or genuine desire for change. It's guilt. It's self-reproach. It's a vague sense that we've been bad and now we need to be good. And the problem with that is when guilt is the engine, we get a very particular kind of goal. One that's harsh, purifying, performative, and punitive. I think we end up treating January like a courtroom, where December was the scene of the crime, and the rest of the year becomes the sentence, one that we pretty quickly start finding ways to escape from. I also think that's why we often pick goals for ourselves as part of New Year's resolutions that we don't actually enjoy, or why we choose the most extreme version and set ourselves up with these all or nothing conditions where one slip means total failure and we often give up. It's almost like we're secretly not trying to build a better life, but to balance out an unforgiving moral ledger for the bad life we've already led. And when the guilt fades, which it usually does by mid-January, we're left with a goal we never actually wanted, that we chose while feeling bad about ourselves, that has no connection to what we actually value or who we actually are or want to be. So no wonder it doesn't stick. So that's the historical baggage, and why I think it means that we often don't set ourselves up for success merely through the timing when we choose to make these resolutions. But I think there's more here too. And now let's look at the psychology of resolutions, which doesn't quite help us succeed either. So there's a concept in psychology called the fresh start effect. And it's not wrong, exactly. It just doesn't tell us the whole story. Because the idea is that certain moments, temporal landmarks to psychologists, feel like natural shifting points. Moments like birthdays or the first of the month, Mondays, and most powerfully, New Year's Day. And at these moments, we feel like we can draw a really strong line between past me and future me. All the failures, all the bad habits, all the times we didn't live up to our intentions, that was the old version of me. The new version starts now with a clean slate. And psychologically, this does actually boost motivation. Studies show that people are genuinely more likely to start new projects, sign up for gyms, begin diets, or what have you right after one of these temporal landmarks. The fresh start effect is real. The problem is more what we do with it. Because there's a difference between I feel motivated to start something and I can become a completely different person through sheer force of will. And I think the fresh start narrative encourages quite a bit of that second type of narrative. It encourages us to think of the 1st of January as a kind of reset button. Out with the old me, in with the new me. Tabula rasa, John Locke style, a blank slate. Which sounds great. Who wouldn't want a blank slate? All those accumulated failures and bad habits and disappointing patterns, just wipe them away and start fresh. Except you can't actually do that. Because you're still you. And does that mean you wipe away all of the good stuff you've built up around yourself too? It really reminds me of a TV show I love called Grand Designs. Perhaps you've seen it, it's pretty popular. The premise is really simple. People build ambitious, usually very expensive houses, and they'll say they'll do it in 3 months with $1,000 budget. But that's not the point. Let's not get distracted by that hilariously overconfident but inevitable downfall bit. No, instead let's focus on what they choose to build. Because often these dream houses are modernist glass cubes, all sleek lines and polished concrete and absolutely no amusing tat or tchotchkes. And there's a recurring pattern on that show. Someone will say, when we move into this house, our dream house, everything will be different. We'll live more simply. We'll be more intentional. The space will transform how we exist. And then they move in. And all of their stuff comes with them, all the literal baggage, the same junk, the same children who are still annoying. And that minimalist glass cube fills up with the debris of their actual lives because it turns out they're still the same people. They just have a ridiculous mortgage now. And that's kind of what New Year, New Me is. It's building a beautiful glass cube and expecting it to transform you, while all your same patterns and preferences and avoidances come shuffling right through that front door. The self, I suspect, is extremely good at surviving renovations. So when we treat January as a knockdown and rebuild, we're setting ourselves up for a nasty surprise. Particularly when we find maybe we miss living in the old house, when we find ourselves 3 weeks later doing all of the things we said we wouldn't and being all of the ways we said we'd stop being. And I really don't think it's a failure. That's the wrong way to look at it. It's just that blank slate resolutions dodge the only useful starting point, which is who we actually are. And speaking of dodging useful starting points, did you know there's a specific day where most people give up their resolutions? It's the 19th of January. They call it Quitter's Day. A fitness app called Strava analysed 800 million activities and found that's the day motivation collapses. Which is kind of funny, right? We're so predictable that our failure has even been assigned a date. There's probably a Hallmark card for it, sorry your resolutions died. They were so young. But Quitter's Day isn't really the problem. Quitter's Day is the symptom. It's the moment when the fresh start effect wears off and we're left alone with whoever we actually are. And if we haven't reckoned with that person, if we've just been trying to build a glass cube around them, then the 19th of January, it was always coming for us. But okay, so say you've heard all of this before. The fresh start is an illusion, real change takes time, blah, blah, blah. You know that. What's the usual answer? Try harder. Be more disciplined, summon more willpower. And there's a whole philosophical tradition behind this. It's very seductive. Friedrich Nietzsche, again, called humans, quote, the animal with the right to make promises. That, he thought, was what made us different from other creatures. We can bind our future selves to our present intentions. We can say, I will, and mean it across time. And the philosopher Christine Korsgaard argues that this capacity for commitment is basically what makes us persons. Integrity. The ability to hold yourself together across time, to resist momentary desires in favour of your deeper commitments. That's the foundation, she thinks, of having a self at all. Which sounds pretty good, right? The ability to make and keep promises is part of the things that make us human. So if you're failing at your resolutions, you need to just be more human, more integrated and more committed, maybe? And this is where I think we get to what I'm going to call the Fight Clubification of self-improvement. You know that reading of Fight Club, whether the film or the book, where the message is, modern life has made us soft. We need to reclaim our true self through violence and discipline and the rejection of comfort. And that's a misreading, by the way. The whole point of the story is that Tyler Durden is a destructive fantasy, but it's a very popular misreading. So I'm going to use the Fight Clubification label anyway. But I think a lot of self-improvement culture has this same energy. The idea that the answer to every failing is to be more disciplined, more strength, more will. If you're not achieving your goals, it's because you're weak. You're not committed enough. You're not willing to suffer enough. The Stoics get recruited for this a lot. And you know that favourite Marcus Aurelius quote of, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Sounds great on a poster. Very motivational. But here's the thing about Marcus Aurelius, and this has been said before, but he was emperor of Rome. He had, let's say, quite a lot of external power too. He lived in a society built on slavery and conquest, which, and I'm just going to say it, probably made the whole focus on what you control thing a whole bit easier when you controlled, almost everything. And Seneca, the other Stoic everybody quotes, was one of the richest men in Rome. He wrote beautiful things about how wealth doesn't matter while owning multiple villas and lending money at interest across the empire. Sure, Seneca, very convincing. I don't want to be too unfair to the Stoics because there is real wisdom there, although it has been extraordinarily overplayed. But I think that the modern version, the Instagram Stoicism, the just be more disciplined bro version, it flattens it out into something that's really just flattering. For me, it's selling something that certain people want. Because again, it fits that punish yourself mentality and that guilt complex, but it's actually not helpful. And frankly, it flatters us a bit too much because it puts the solution entirely inside our control. You don't need to change your circumstances. You don't need to question your goals. You don't need to understand yourself better. You just need to try harder. That's often the message. And conveniently, when it doesn't work, that's also your fault. You weren't strong enough. You weren't stoic enough. The system is never wrong. You just failed to execute it properly. There is no true Scotsman, or stoic in this case. Stoic Scotsman? Siri, self-help book idea. This is the willpower trap. Not that willpower doesn't exist or doesn't matter, it does. But treating it as the only variable, as the only thing that determines success or failure, lets us avoid the much harder question, which is, why did we pick this goal in the first place? Because here's what I've come to think. A resolution that requires constant self-coercion, where every day is a battle against your own desires, that's not evidence of weakness. That's evidence of misalignment. It's information. It's telling you something. It might be telling you that you chose these goals for the wrong reasons, or that it doesn't actually fit who you are, or that you're trying to become a person you genuinely don't want to be. And no amount of willpower is going to fix that. Although perhaps liking, hyping, and subscribing will help you fix that? No, it won't. Sorry, I just lied to you. But it will help me make more videos and help you know about them, so give it a thought. Thanks. So if willpower isn't the real issue, what is? Well, the ancient Greeks had a word for this problem, like they always do, but in this case, it's akrasia. It's usually translated as weakness of will, which is ironic given the discussion we've just had, but give it a moment. It's knowing what's good, but doing the opposite. Aristotle thought akrasia was one of those central puzzles of ethics. How can someone know that they should go to the gym, genuinely believe it's good for them, and still not go? How can knowledge fail to move us? His answer roughly was that in the moment of temptation, our knowledge gets clouded. We know the good in some abstract sense, but immediate pleasure or comfort overwhelms it. We need to train ourselves through habit until the good becomes second nature, which, okay, fine, but I don't think that quite captures what's going on with failed resolutions either. Because I don't think the problem is always that we know the good and fail to do it. I think it is that sometimes the problem is that we've chosen the wrong good, or someone else's good, or a good that made sense when we were feeling guilty on the 1st of January, but doesn't actually connect to anything we care about. Let me give you an example. Say you resolve to go to the gym 5 times a week. That's the goal. And you think, this is good. I should be fitter. Everyone agrees fitness is good. But here's the question. Do you actually like the people who go to the gym 5 times a week? Not whether you respect them or think they're admirable. Do you actually like them? Would you want to hang out with them? Do you want to be like them? Because if deep down you find the gym and gym culture kind of annoying, if the people who talk about their macros and their PRs and their 5 a.m. workout routines aren't the people you choose to spend time with, then you're setting yourself up for a very specific kind of failure. You're trying to be someone you don't actually want to be. And your resistance isn't weakness, it's self-knowledge. Some part of you is saying, hey, I don't think I want this. The same goes for any resolution. Want to read more books? Great. But do you like actually being the kind of person who's always reading and recommending books? Or do you find them a bit insufferable? Or do you want to meditate every day? Do you genuinely want the calm, detached vibe that serious meditators have? Or does some part of you think that they're kind of boring and kind of want to pick fights with them? Look, don't judge me. It's fun. But what I'm saying is that fitness or reading or meditation aren't inherently bad. They might be exactly right for you. The point is, we often pick goals without asking whether we actually want to become the person who achieves them. And if we don't, if we're just chasing an image or an ideation or following what we're supposed to want, then we're not going to enjoy the process. We're going to resist it and resent it and eventually abandon it. And here's another question. While I'm being an annoying philosopher who bullies meditators, why do you feel bad about being the person you are? Should you feel bad about it? And I don't mean that we should never change. You're absolutely right in what you're doing. Keep going. I don't mean that. But often we don't give the time to thinking about the person we are right now. And whether we actually have a good picture of that, and whether we have a good picture of the person we want to be, and whether we have a good understanding of what that means too, and the gap between them. Or here's another way to put it. If you hate the process, you're probably not going to like living as the newly built person at the end of it. Because that person, the one who achieved the goal, didn't just arrive there. They became someone who does that thing regularly. If doing that thing is miserable for you, then there's a good chance that being that person will be miserable too. You will become a miserable person. So acrasia, weakness of will, the failure to do what we know is good, I think that's often a misdescription. The real question isn't, why can't I stick to this? It is, why did I pick this in the first place? What am I actually trying to escape? What do I genuinely value? And whose voice is in my head telling me I should want this? Those are harder questions, but they're the ones that matter. So we've established that try harder isn't the answer, and that the real question is why we picked this goal in the first place, which means we need to talk about values. I know, values sounds like something from a corporate training seminar. Here at Megacorp, our values are synergy, disruption, and no microwaving fish in the break room. But bear with me, because I think that this is actually where resolutions live or die. Aristotle, again, had this idea that virtue isn't something that you achieve. It's something that you practice. You don't become courageous by doing one brave thing. You become courageous by doing brave things repeatedly until bravery becomes part of who you are. He put it like this, quote, "We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts." Which sounds really obvious, I know, but I think it has an important implication for resolutions. Most resolutions are what you might call outcome focused. Lose 10 kilos, run a marathon, write a novel, read 50 books. There's a finish line, and you're going to either cross it or not. And the problem with outcome focused resolutions is that you spend most of your time not having achieved them. You're always in a state of not yet. And if you don't hit that target, or if you hit it and then, gain the weight back or stop running, you've failed. Binary, pass or fail. But Aristotle's model suggests something different. What if, instead of resolving to achieve an outcome, you resolve to practice something? Not, I will lose 20 pounds, but I will move my body in ways that feel good regularly. Not, I will read 50 books, but I will read for 20 minutes before bed. Not, I will write a novel, but I will write for half an hour each morning, even if it's terrible. The difference is a little subtle, I think, but it's important. With a practice resolution, every time you do the thing, you've succeeded. You're not waiting to cross a finish line. You're just being someone who does this successfully. Congratulations. And over time, that practice shapes you. You become, in Aristotle's terms, the kind of person who reads or who writes or who moves. Not because you forced yourself across the finish line, but because you repeated something until it became a part of your character. Now, this only works if the practice actually connects to something you value. And I don't mean value in the abstract performative sense. I mean, what do you actually care about when no one's watching? What kind of life do you genuinely want to live? Not what you think makes you happy, but what, demonstrably and with past evidence, has actually made you happy. If you value connection with friends, maybe your resolution isn't be more social, but have a coffee with somebody I miss once a week. If you value craft or creativity, maybe it's not become an artist, but spend 20 minutes a day making something on purpose, or even badly on purpose, because the badly on purpose part, I think, is also a little important here, by the way. It takes the pressure off. I think one of the essential parts of actually good, workable resolutions is that they are both positive and low stakes. Maybe not low stakes in their outcome, but low stakes in the bar you have to clear every day. You're not trying to produce a masterpiece. You're just practicing being someone who makes things. If you value calm or presence, maybe it's not meditate for an hour every day until you achieve enlightenment, but sit quietly for 5 minutes each morning and see what happens. The point is, when the practice expresses a value you actually hold, you don't need as much willpower. It's not a constant battle. It's just what you do, part of who you are. And that, I think, is what Aristotle meant by virtue becoming a second nature. It's not that virtuous people are constantly resisting temptation. It's that for them, the good thing has become the natural thing. They practiced it until it's just how they live. That's the goal. Not a finish line, but a way of being. But here's where I want to complicate things a bit, because we've been talking about resolutions as if they're just personal choices. You pick a goal and it either fits your values or it doesn't. Success or failure depends on alignment. And that's true as far as it goes, but it ignores the context in which we're making these choices. Because we don't make resolutions in a vacuum. We make them in a culture that is extremely invested in selling us self-improvement. Think about January. What happens in January, commercially speaking? Gym memberships spike, diet books hit the bestseller lists, wellness apps run their biggest marketing campaigns. The self-help industry, which is worth billions of dollars, goes into overdrive. And the message is everywhere. You're not enough as you are, but you could be, for 3 easy payments of $29.99. Now, I don't want to do the thing where capitalism is the villain in every video. It's boring and it's not quite true and it lets us off the hook for our own choices. But I do think it's worth noting that the guilt we feel in January, the sense that we're bad and we need to be better, is extremely profitable for certain industries. They didn't create the guilt, maybe, but they've gotten very good at harvesting it. The philosopher Michel Foucault had this concept he called technologies of the self. It sounds like a bit of jargon, but the idea is very useful. He meant it as the practices and the techniques that cultures build and encourage people to use on themselves, to monitor, to discipline, and to shape themselves according to certain norms. And I think New Year's resolutions, in their modern form, have become one of these technologies, a ritual of self-surveillance. We assess ourselves, and not the genuine self, but this kind of external self, against some ideals. We find ourselves lacking, and we commit to a program of improvement or change, and often very external change. We track our progress, we measure ourselves, we become, in a sense, our own managers, which isn't inherently bad. I mean, self-reflection is good, and wanting to grow is good. And Foucault contrasted these technologies of the self with techniques of selfhood, which for him was a much slower, more historically hidden, more modest practice of self-cultivation, one that actually often involved a master-student relationship, a sort of teaching and connection which isn't inherent in the modern technologies of knowledge. And yes, that's a whole nother video. I'll get around to it someday, but it's also kind of something I've been nudging us towards throughout this video in the interests of transparency, because there's something a bit strange about a culture where we're constantly being told we need to optimize ourselves, where standing still feels like falling behind, and where contentment is almost suspect. Like, what's wrong with you? Don't you want to be better? The Danish philosopher Sven Brinkmann wrote a book with the provocative title Stand Firm, and it's kind of an anti-self-help book. And his argument is basically enough. Enough with the constant pressure to improve. Enough with treating yourselves as a project that's never finished. He says, and I'm paraphrasing a little, it's time to content ourselves with being average. Which sounds almost heretical, right? In a culture of optimization, saying maybe I'm fine as I am feels like giving up. But I think there's something genuinely liberating in it. The idea that you don't have to constantly be striving, that you're allowed to just be. That not every year needs to be a renovation project. Some resolutions, I've come to think, they aren't really self-care. They're just internalized management. They're us treating ourselves the way a corporation treats an underperforming employee, with setting targets, monitoring process, and punishing failure. And when the resolution fails, we don't question the system. We blame ourselves for not executing. The system, the culture of endless self-improvement, is never wrong. We're just not trying hard enough. Does it sound familiar? It should, because it's the same trap we talked about with willpower, but zoomed out. It's not just that we pick the wrong goals, it's that the whole framework of you must constantly improve yourself might be a part of the problem. So what's the alternative? Well, here's a thought. What if the best resolutions aren't about improving yourself at all? Remember how we talked about the ancient resolutions being communal? The Babylonians made pledges about repaying debts and returning borrowed things. The early Christians resolved to be better members of their communities. It wasn't New Year, New Me. It was New Year, Better Us. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. Resolutions became private projects of self-improvement. My body, my productivity, my success. But what if we went back to the older model? Not the vengeful gods part, sorry Ishtar, but the outward focus. The idea that maybe the most meaningful promises aren't the ones about what I'm going to do for myself, but what I'm going to do for others. Immanuel Kant, and you knew he was going to show up eventually, had this test for whether an action is truly good. He asked, is what is good for me also good for others? Could I will that everybody do this? And I think that's a useful filter for resolutions. I want to get richer doesn't pass the test. If everyone tried to get richer, we wouldn't all succeed and a lot of us would end up poorer. It's zero sum. But I want to be more present with my family, or I want to contribute to my community. Those do scale. They are better when more people do them. Now, Kant, being Kant, he also thought that the most morally praiseworthy actions were the ones you didn't enjoy. Like, if you help someone and you feel good about it, that's nice. But it's not as pure as helping someone when you really don't want to. Duty over inclination, which is very Kantian and honestly kind of joyless. But here's the good news. You don't have to be a Kantian martyr. Research pretty consistently shows that helping others actually makes you feel good. It's one of the most reliable ways to improve your own well-being, which is ironic, given we're trying to escape the self-focus, but there you go. And doing it with other people, volunteering in a group, joining a community project, multiplies the effect. So you're allowed to enjoy it. Kant might disapprove, but Kant disapproved of a lot of things. There's also a Confucian angle here that I find very useful. In Confucian thought, the self isn't the isolated thing that you improve in private. The self is relational. It's constituted by your roles. You're a parent, a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, a citizen. And becoming a better person means becoming better at those roles, showing up better for the people in your life. Which means a resolution doesn't have to be, I will transform myself. It can be, I will be a better friend. I will call my parents more. I will actually remember my neighbours' names. Hi, Becky and John. This one's for you. They watch sometimes. These aren't about self-improvement in the usual sense. They're about repair, about tending to relationships and communities that make up a life. And here's the really radical version. What if your resolution wasn't about changing yourself or even about changing your relationships, but about changing the world you live in? Like, I will reduce my plastic use. I will get involved in local politics. I will support a cause that I actually care about. I will make my neighborhood slightly less terrible. These aren't self-improvement. They're about world improvement. And they sidestep a lot of the traps that we've been talking about. Because accountability isn't just about yourself, it's to others, to a cause, to something beyond your own metrics. The goal isn't to be a better optimized individual, it's to make things better for people who aren't you. That's what I believe, at least, anyway. And weirdly, that kind of thing might be more motivating. When it's just about you, it's easy to let yourself off the hook. When it's about others, there's something real at stake. So maybe that's the move. Not new year, new me, but a John F. Kennedy-esque new year. What can I do for somebody else? So let's pull some of this together. Philosophically speaking, what would a different kind of resolution actually look like? Well, first, I think it's about process over prize. And there's a philosopher who puts this really well. Kiran Satir is a philosopher at MIT, and he makes this distinction between what he calls telic and atelic activities. Telic activities have an end, a point, a telos, a goal. You're working towards something, and when you achieve it, it's done. It's like writing a novel or running a marathon, losing a kilo or two. These are telic. Atelic activities, on the other hand, they don't have a built-in finish line. They're ongoing. You do them, and the doing is the point. Going for a walk, spending time with friends, reading, making things, playing music. These are atelic. And Satir's insight is that a life built entirely around telic activities, goal after goal after goal, that's kind of exhausting. You're always either striving towards something you don't yet have, or you've achieved something and it's over, and now you need a new goal. There's no rest, and there's no arrival. There's no celebration or joy. There's just the next finish line. Whereas atelic activities are satisfying in the present. You're not waiting to cross a line. You're just doing the thing. And every moment of doing is complete in itself. And I think this maps pretty directly onto what we've been saying about resolutions. Most resolutions are telic. They're about achieving something. And that structure sets you up for the not yet problem. You're always failing until you succeed, and then success is over and you need a new goal. But what if you reframed your resolution as atelic, as an ongoing practice, rather than as an achievement? Not, I will get fit, but I will move in ways that I enjoy. Not, I will become fluent in Spanish, but I will practice Spanish for 15 minutes a day. Not, I will fix my relationship with my family, but I will call my mum on Sundays. The shift is, you're not trying to arrive somewhere. You're trying to live a certain way. And every time you do it, you're already there. You've succeeded. Now, the second thing, and this is where Foucault comes back briefly, is the idea of treating your life as an experiment. Foucault talked about limit experiences, moments where you push against the boundary of who you are and discover something new. Now, in his case, that involves some fairly extreme stuff that we don't need to get into here, but the underlying idea is useful because I suspect that we don't actually know what we want. Not really. We think we do, but a lot of what we think we want is inherited. It's from our culture, our families, our past selves, what we consume. We haven't actually tested it. So what if, instead of making grand declarations about who you're going to become this year, you just tried things? Low stakes, experimental, see what sticks. Join a community choir and see if you like singing with people, or volunteer at a food bank for a month and see how it feels. Take a class in something you know nothing about but seems interesting. Go to a local council meeting just once. See what happens. Train a guide dog puppy. Okay, that one's a bigger commitment, but you get the idea. I really want a guide dog puppy, but Mr. Elliot always vetoes it. The point is, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what might resonate with you, what might open up new avenues, what might actually change how you see yourself and what you want. And you're not going to find that out by sitting alone with your notes app making declarations about the person you intend to become. You find out by doing things, by trying stuff, by being open to surprise. So my advice, if you really want to try this resolutions malarkey, is treat the year as a series of experiments. Some will fail, and that's fine. That's what experiments do. But some may succeed in unexpected ways, and some will teach you something about yourself that you couldn't have learned any other way. The self you'll be in December, the next one, might want completely different things than the self making the resolutions this January. And that's not failure. That's just growth. That's what a year of actually living looks like. So where does this leave us? I'm not going to pretend that I've got a neat answer. That would be very hypocritical of me after everything we've just talked about. But I do think there's something useful here. A different way of approaching this whole ritual. Nietzsche had this phrase that I repeat often in these videos, which is become who you are, which sounds like a paradox, right? How can you become what you already are? But I think something of what he meant is that you don't start with a fixed image of your ideal self and then paint yourself into it. That's the blank slate fantasy. That's the glass cube. Instead, you discover who you are through living, through trying out things and through failing at them, through finding out what actually resonates with you, not what you thought should resonate, through paying attention to what makes you come alive and what drains you. Becoming who you are is a process of discovery, not construction. And that means that there isn't a final, achievable, perfect self waiting at the end of the year. We're too complicated for that. We're too contradictory. The person you want to be is going to shift and change as you learn more about yourself and about the world. So instead of a resolution, let me offer 3 questions. You can ask them on the 1st of January or any other day, really. It's not a system. It's just kind of a place to start. And the first is, am I trying to escape? Because a lot of resolutions are really about running away from something. And it's worth being honest about what that is. Are you trying to escape your body, your job, your relationships, your sense of inadequacy? Name it. Look at it. It might tell you something useful, or it might challenge your thinking. And the second is, what do I genuinely value when nobody's watching? Not what you're supposed to value, not what would look good on Instagram, but what actually matters to you in the quiet moments when you're not performing for anyone. And the third is, what change would make life better for someone other than me? Because maybe the most sustainable resolutions aren't about self-improvements at all. Maybe they're about repair or contributions or showing up for other people. And those have a kind of accountability that self-focused goals just don't have. Or, okay, maybe these questions aren't for you. Fair enough. We need different things at different stages in life. Or you might have done well and made it past all of those hurdles. That's great. But if you want one practice to take away from this, I think it's this. Pick one value, something that you actually care about. And you'll know it's real if you can point to evidence in your life that you do actually care about it. And then choose one ongoing activity that expresses that value. Not a finish line, a practice. Something you can do this week, next week, and the week after. And re-choose it regularly, weekly maybe. Not as a grim obligation, but as a joy, a check-in, and as something you really do genuinely enjoy. You can ask, is this still what I want to be doing? Is this still who I want to be? And treat everything else as experiments, low stakes, open to surprise. See what happens. So that's where we've landed. The Babylonians had Ishtar. We have ourselves. And honestly, we're not great at holding ourselves accountable. But maybe that's okay. Because maybe the point never was to perfectly execute a plan for self-transformation. Maybe it was always about paying attention, asking better questions, being honest about what we want and why we want it. And maybe the best resolutions, as I said, aren't about becoming a new person at all. Maybe they're about becoming more yourself, which is something that you discover, not something you build from a plan at the start of the year. If it works, great. If it doesn't, blame Ishtar. She's been slacking off for about 4,000 years now. She deserves some accountability too. And hey, leave a comment. Tell me, what's one resolution that isn't about improving you? What's one about improving the world you live in or showing up better for someone else? Or tell me about an experiment you're going to try this year. Something you don't know if you'll like. Something you're just going to see what happens. I love hearing about what's going on in your life. It makes me feel connected too, and I'm not just shouting out into the void. And I'm curious. But thanks for watching. And until next time, be wise and be kind and, okay, maybe don't make Ishtar too angry.